Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us, and obviously the waiting game continues here. Georgia fans hoping for some good news with the former five-star, the former Bama safety, Caleb Downs, who seems to be like right there at the doorstep of making a decision about his new college home, and that could be the Georgia Bulldogs. We're obviously watching all of that very closely here today, and we will continue to do so. Jeff Sentell also going to stop by here. Let me say this, too, kind of like housekeeping type stuff. We're obviously kind of in that sort of final day for us of in this studio. We're going to a new studio once I'm back on the other side of my Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for next week. And so this is sort of our last day of kind of doing the early morning pre-record for what airs at 10 a.m. So if something were to happen with any of this during that 10 a.m. hour, obviously, at that point in time, we would kind of break in and do that. But for now, we're going to kind of operate on the assumption that things are kind of where we think they are, kind of in these final days, final moments, I should say, before Downs makes his decision. So that's a lot of our show today, and we will also take some time to look at some other things around that, too. When Jeff stops by later on, it's going to be a great recruiting conversation because there has been so much of that going on here as of late when it comes to UGA. So a fun show, good day to have you with us. Kind of a getaway day for us of sorts, but still a full effort here to make it fun for all of you. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you remember the movie from the early 2000s, Anchorman, the idea of Panda Watch. I feel like we're on kind of like Panda Watch Day 3, or maybe it's Caleb Downs Watch Day 3 at this point in time. Downs has been in the transfer portal. Georgia fans have been feeling like that is good news. We continue to wait on all of that here today. So we're talking about that with you on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and just kind of feeling our way around here. Jeff Sentell going to help us with this coming up in just a little bit. So a lot to give you on perhaps where all of this stands here. That is coming up in just a few minutes' time. Can we do something, though, while we're waiting, kind of while we're passing the time, and hopeful to hear some good news maybe on Caleb Downs at some point in time today? Can we do something while we're waiting here for a moment? Because I was thinking about this as it relates to Downs. So when a guy like this who chose Alabama, and we talked yesterday about what Downs' father told 24/7 Sports about the fact that he felt like he got good coaching there, and going to play for Nick Saban was a thing he was glad he got to do, even if it was just for 1 year. We would say that makes sense. I mean, Alabama's obviously had a very successful program. Nick Saban's obviously a very good coach, and pretty clearly they have a history of developing guys for the NFL. All of that makes a lot of sense. And in the absence of that, the sort of obvious next choice is a place like Georgia, which also has a great history of putting big-time defensive backs in the NFL and just sort of players on the defensive side of the ball in general. And it is just sort of, if you're looking for a new home and if you're thinking about, I've got 24 months to develop me the best that I possibly can to move on to the NFL draft, well, obviously Georgia, to a lot of us and to a lot of the rest of college football, sort of seems like the obvious choice in all of that. That is the brand that Georgia has built on that side of the ball. And sometimes you sort of wonder if we're in sort of a next phase of development for Georgia on the offensive side of the ball, so that in future years, recruits, transfers, whoever else, like Caleb Downs, who say, you know what, if I'm going to make this decision, I'll just go to Georgia because it just sort of seems like the obvious choice, that if Georgia could be in the midst of sort of building something on the other side of the ball that sort of functions kind of the same way. And I'll tell you why I thought about that. When Kirby Smart the other day, the obvious Georgia coach, was on with 92.9 The Game, we've talked about the interview that he did on the Steakhouse, our buddy Rusty Mansell, Steak Shapiro. They're doing that. One of the things that Kirby was asked was about the return of Carson Beck. And I thought it was very interesting that in discussing Beck's return for the upcoming season, Kirby almost talked as much about like the forward-thinking part of this, of what this could do for Georgia over the course of the long haul. He almost talked about that part of that as much as he talked about the individual impact that Beck could make on this upcoming season, which obviously will be the final year that he plays in a Georgia uniform. The conversation that Kirby sort of spun it to was more broad than that, and kind of the the signal that I think it sends for the program over the course of the long haul. I sort of find this to be interesting, and so as we all kind of bide our time here and wait for some good news, we hope, out of the transfer portal, let's talk about Carson Beck a little bit and his return to Georgia and what Kirby Smart said about that the other day. Take a listen to this.
It's a huge momentum builder. I think it gives a lot of confidence in the program that even things are headed in the right direction. He has enough confidence in us as coaches and as a staff to continue to lead and direct him in the right direction. I mean, it's ultimately a business decision for him. He's looking at it as, can he grow and extend his NFL career by being at Georgia another year, therefore being more prepared for the NFL when he goes. And I thought he did a real good job researching things. He had a lot of help around him in terms of getting good information and not making an emotional decision. I thought he could have come out and it'd be the right decision for him. He could have stayed and it'd be the right decision for him. There's no true right or wrong for him. I think he made the decision that fit him best. And his long-term goals are to play a long time in the NFL, and he wants to prepare a little more and win some games while he's doing it. So it's certainly big for us because it had a major impact on not only recruiting but guys deciding to stay with him.
There are like three things I want to get to from that clip, and I want to sort of work my way backwards on all of that. First of all, you hear Kirby Smart say, hey, this impacted us in recruiting. This impacted us for guys in the transfer portal. People notice when a guy like Carson Beck comes back, and that's what I'm sort of saying here. Is that, when Caleb Downs is looking for a new school, well, of course you just go to Georgia. Look what Georgia does for guys like you. Admittedly, even with Georgia being a great program, a program that's capable of winning multiple national championships and really kind of being a fixture in sort of the national scene, I don't know that it's always been that obvious and easy for prospects to make that choice on the offensive side of the ball. And this is just a fact of life. No one's kind of perfect in every regard. Everyone's got strengths and weaknesses, and the perception, I think some of this has been enhanced by negative recruiting at times, but the perception is, Georgia's fine for defense or it's fine for line of scrimmage, but if you're a quarterback, if you're a skill position player, is that really the place that you're going to want to go? And what Kirby Smart says is Beck's decision to return can be part of the evolution where all of a sudden, that as a way of negative recruiting against UGA, that no longer works anymore because people are noticing Beck's decision to come back. Now, Kirby also kind of talks about sort of the tangible facts of that decision, and I do believe that Carson, for his own best interest, has probably made the best choice for him because you can come back, you can learn more, you can develop more, and you can kind of move yourself from, the most likely, I guess, draft projection sort of had for Beck, maybe like a second-round pick, which is not necessarily a bad place to be, but by playing better at Georgia for one more year, all of a sudden now you're talking about not just being in the first round, but you're perhaps talking about being the kind of the front end of the first round and the sort of life-changing 8-figure money that obviously you would want if you had the chance to get that with a better year at UGA, another really good year, I should say, at UGA. All of a sudden now, Carson Beck's sort of in that discussion. So from Beck's perspective, perhaps, he's sort of done right by himself on all of this. And admittedly, we are, obviously a little selfish around here. We also like what this could mean, for Georgia overall, because as we've sort of talked about, and we'll talk to Jeff Sentell more about this here coming up in a moment, the eyes of the world are watching. And a guy like Julian Lewis, the quarterback committed to USC, formerly a class of 2026, we found out this week that Lewis is now going to reclassify to the class of 2025. And, a guy like that, before he sort of made what was sort of the obvious choice for him. If you're a quarterback, where do you go? You go to USC, you work with Lincoln Riley. That's the guy who made Kyler Murray into a Heisman winner and made Baker Mayfield into a Heisman winner and had great success with this quarterback, and that's just sort of what he is. That's what Riley has been, and that's kind of what Georgia hasn't been. But all of a sudden now you see Beck coming back for a year, and you see Beck filling the shoes of a guy before him in Stetson Bennett who became a Heisman finalist. And all of a sudden people are kind of watching this here now, and they're saying, well, you know what? Maybe Georgia is a destination spot for quarterbacks. Maybe that's what this is. And that's why when Kirby Smart used a word like momentum builder in a clip like that, I think it resonates really well. And I think you're kind of moving into, as Kirby Smart goes into, what is this, year 9 coming up for Kirby in the Georgia job? You're almost seeing sort of a next phase of the development. Nobody can say that anyone does a better job overall of bringing in the kind of defensive prospects that Georgia just always seems to win with. And they don't just win with them on the recruiting trail. They bring them in and they develop them into something really special while they're at UGA. No one can dispute Georgia's ability to do that. That has been proven time and time again. And now you're starting to see the makings of that same kind of thing on the offensive side of the ball. The honest truth is, for the last 3 years, Georgia's averaged about 40 points per game. That is a legit offense. They're one of the highest scoring offense in the SEC here this past season. And the quarterback that allowed them to achieve that level of success, as Kirby just said in the clip you heard, he looked around, he saw the development that he was getting, he saw the players he was going to have a chance to play with, and he said, I want to come back and run it back and one more time go about my business here and take care of some of that unfinished business that Carson was talking about back in Miami prior to the Orange Bowl. That's what I want to be a part of. Kirby calls that an incredible ringing endorsement, and I believe that is indeed the case. Carson Beck likes what Georgia's doing on the offensive side of the ball, and that could prove to be very bad news for much of the rest of college football, because they have been very comfortable with the notion of, Georgia's fine on defense, and guys like Caleb Downs, they may want to go transfer there because they think they can get to the NFL that way, but they're nothing special on offense. They're nothing, great on offense. That's not what Georgia's strength is. But when a guy like Beck comes back and transfer receivers come to the program because they want to play with him and enhance their own status because of that, and offensive linemen like Tate Ratledge say, hey, I could go to the NFL, but I'm ready for one more year at UGA because of what this could be, and on and on and on those decisions go. What it certainly seems like is possible here, and the Beck decision seems to foreshadow that, is that moving forward, Georgia will be just as strong on the offensive side as it has been on the defensive side. And that is a notion for Georgia fans that's plenty fun to think about. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Glad to have you with us. This is sort of our final day in this studio. First of all, we've been here since 2021. We bounce around studios every couple of years, it seems like, but this is sort of our swan song here in this studio here today. And in some respects, I'm sort of happy to see it come to an end. A lot of you know we've had some issues here over the last few months, and so brand new horizon for us that's going to be a lot of fun. And, of course, because of the issues we've had, we also know we've been kind of recording these early morning to kind of deliver to you there at 10 a.m. So as we're watching the Caleb Downs stuff, we'll have more on that coming up in a moment. If something were to happen with that, we'll do like we did the other day. We'll just sort of pop in. I will break in, we'll talk, and we'll hit that live. But for now, we're kind of viewing this in sort of the anticipatory status of what is coming next on all of that. And, of course, a big thanks to our friends at Kroger who make all of this possible today. Kroger been with us for a long time. We're certainly grateful to all of them. And don't forget, really exciting stuff coming up at Kroger. I love the guided kids cooking experience we call Kroger Chef Junior. I just think that's a great thing. And I love the idea that one more time this month, that's coming up tomorrow, get a chance to make some chicken salad there as a part of the Kroger Chef Junior experience. Now, it's just $7 per child. You go to Kroger Chef Junior and find out all the details that you need there on that. In addition to you and your kid getting a chance to be a part of this cooking experience, your child's also going to receive an apron, a patch, a chef's hat, and a spatula. Who doesn't want a spatula in their life? All of that coming your way, just $7 per child. You can find out more details, KrogerChefJunior.com for more on that. And of course, the word junior is spelled out Junior, KrogerChefJunior.com for a lot more on that. All right, we've got Jeff Sentell here coming up in just a moment. Now, it's going to be a fascinating conversation with Jeff Sentell because the one point we've tried to make on the show this week is that the pursuit of downs is, far from the only thing that Georgia has had going on as of late. What we have been saying is that when you look at the energy with which Georgia approached kind of the first big visit weekend for the class of 2025 last weekend, when you look at the way in which, Georgia's had coaches all about. It's been great to see T-Rob on the road for UGA. Been great to see Kirby Smart getting so much face time in a lot of cases with, like, say, recent Alabama decommits. That's been really interesting. It just seems like, Kirby Smart is and his staff, they are as aggressive on the trail right now as they've ever been. And I know what a big statement that is to sort of make that statement on our show here today, but that just sort of seems like where this is here right now. So, obviously, we're following all that really closely. Jeff Sentell's following it even more closely, and so he's going to have some really good stuff for us here coming up in a couple of minutes' time. Can't wait to do that with Jeff. Before that, though, let me go around the doghouse, and it's poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And let me give you sort of my perspective of where this stands with Downs here right now. So we have talked about, well, if he's going to come to Georgia, how do you get him into class? You know, school's already started. Drop out, I believe, is already over. I was never a great student anyway. I'm certainly far removed from my college years, so there are plenty of people who know more about the academic part of this than I do. But as Connor Riley pointed out when he joined us for our RS Andrews cooldown the other day, we were kind of talking about the initial part of this Caleb Downs stuff, that, talk to Jerry Moorhead, you talk to, sort of high-ranking university officials. There's sort of a way to make stuff happen. In the case of Caleb Downs, obviously, if he wants to come to Georgia, Georgia's going to figure out a way academically, you would think, to sort of make that happen. But there's also the other part of this, which is online chatter would suggest that, Downs has also visited with Ohio State coaches, that when he made the decision to go to Alabama before, it was sort of Ohio State very much in the mix, Georgia in the mix too, and frankly, at that particular time, Georgia was probably no better than the bronze medalist for Caleb Downs' services. There seems to be a lot of belief that pecking order has changed now to the point where Georgia may be the most desirable landing spot here for Downs, but as long as this stays kind of unresolved, I will just admit, as long as this stays unresolved, the more I sort of view it as a possibility, well, something could happen. I don't have any reason to tell you, obviously, anything different than what you're probably reading on the internet, which is it certainly seems like it's quite likely that Caleb Downs ends up at Georgia, and it's quite likely that happens some time here on this Friday. I certainly don't have anything to dispute that, but we also sort of live in an age until the contract is signed, so to speak, until it's all said and done, it seems like anything can happen, and obviously a program like Ohio State is going to probably try to do anything it can to get involved here. And admittedly, we're going to get into some of the weird stuff with Ohio State a little bit later on, but what's a little bit less weird is they have been pretty aggressive this offseason. They go out and get Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, as a for instance. They've been able to hold on to some of the players in their program that perhaps had NFL decisions to make. It seems like, and we have this down in the SEC too, of course, and this is kind of the Big Ten's version of this, that Ohio State is trying its best to offer a strong response to the fact that Michigan won the national championship. Now, I've also said that I think there's a weird vibe around the Buckeyes in that, they wanted to move off from Kyle McCord at the quarterback spot. I don't quite know how well they've upgraded there on that. That's my personal opinion. Maybe others disagree on that. So I can't quite read the full vibe around Ohio State, but while there have been some odd things that have gone on, and we'll get to another quite strange thing related to Ohio State here in a moment, the truth is they can point to some wins, perhaps most prominently the fact that Quinshon Judkins, one of the SEC star players from a year ago, is now on his way to Ohio State. So maybe all of that is a possible foreshadowing of the fact that, they're perhaps involved a little bit here in this for Georgia. And I guess the longer this thing goes unresolved, you kind of wonder, will there be a mystery team that also slides in here too? Is there a chance that someone could sort of wrestle their way in at the last minute? I don't know. I know this. I think I speak on behalf of all Georgia fans when I say that the news we've all been kind of waiting on for the last couple of days here, it'll be very, very nice if indeed the hay truly gets in the barn on this. And at some point in time here on this Friday, we can announce that Caleb Downs is truly transferring to Georgia. Now, what's also funny too is, and I'm not going to get into this right now because I don't know that I have anything new to offer on this, is the notion from some Georgia fans that, hey, it may not just be Downs. There may be more Alabama players on their way to UGA. I don't have anything new to give you on that here right now, but we're obviously on guard for anything here in these unprecedented times as Georgia seems to be doing everything it can to build on itself, and perhaps some of that coming at the expense of Alabama, which dog fans definitely do not hate. We'll make that around the doghouse here today, poured by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And as you wait on Caleb Downs to make his decision, now Downs is not 21, so he can't do this, but you can do this while you're waiting on Caleb Downs to do what he's going to do. You can enjoy some Finish Long Drink, including here in the Peach State for a very limited time, some peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink. That is always a really good thing. Or if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out about all the other varieties of the Finish Long Drink, whether it's the traditional, it's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. Y'all know, I think after all these years, that still remains my favorite here on all of this. Or it's the Long Drink Cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. I sort of feel like post-Royal Caribbean Cruise, which I have coming up, the Long Drink Sugar might be a good choice for me for a little while. Maybe go easy on the carbs and sugar just for a little bit. Probably a wise choice. Either way, whichever version of the Finish Long Drink you think you're going to enjoy, I promise you will. So make sure you check them out online, thelongdrink.com, for more on that. Now, before we get Jeff Sentell, Let me just also say one more thing to you here as well. Speaking of Royal Caribbean Cruises, ongoing right now at DawgNation.com, your chance, courtesy of our friends at Kroger, to register for your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation Cruise coming up in April. Now, some of you know next week I'm on Icon of the Seas. Can't wait for that. In April, we're all going to be together on Allure of the Seas, and someone's going to win their way in. So here's how it works. If you go to DawgNation.com right now, super easy to see, right there, kind of the top of the page, click in. Just give us your information, and we're going to ask you a simple question. Tell us your favorite memory from Brock Bowers' Georgia career. Now, this can be anything. We're going to draw one of those entries at random, and that person, along with the guest, is going to get a stateroom for two on board Allure of the Seas in April, a hotel the night before there in the Port Canaveral area near the port, a gas card to help with some of your travel down to Port Canaveral, and, of course, some onboard credit to enjoy when you're on Allure of the Seas. Now, if you're already on our DawgNation Cruise, I've been telling you, you're still eligible to win this, and we'll just credit that back to you if you are the winner here on this, so no harm, no foul on any of that. This is a really cool thing. Last year, we had a great winner, and we had a great time celebrating with them on board, so maybe this year it could be you. So please go to DawgNation.com to find out more about that. That is DawgNation.com, of course. A cruise giveaway, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. You can be with us on the DawgNation Cruise on Allure of the Seas coming up in April. All right, before we're done today, I told you there is still some weird news coming out of Ohio State, and SEC fans have a particularly interesting vantage point for this. I also talked about a war of words between kind of a passive-aggressive war of words between a couple of SEC coaches. We'll get to that here coming up in just a little bit, too. So some fun SEC-themed news to get to before our show is done here today. That is all on the way. But for now, on everything as it relates to UGA recruiting, we told you it's been busy around that front here as of late. And a couple thoughts on the Caleb Downs stuff, too. Let's get ready to talk to Jeff Sentell here on a Friday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, time now to talk to Jeff Sentell. And, Jeff, the theme of today's show is we're sort of playing the waiting game here a little bit. We're kind of biding time. You know, obviously we're also recording this on a Friday morning. People kind of know that. So, you know, perhaps by the time we get to that, you know, afternoon hour, when a lot of people kind of watch the show later on demand, so to speak, maybe they'll know more than we do now. But for now, it's kind of tick-tock here on Caleb Downs. Anything new to offer on this, Jeff? It sort of seems like, you know, the inquiring minds sort of think that, you know, Georgia sits in a pretty good spot here, but as long as it stays an open issue, there's always a chance for, whether it be Ohio State, which we're led to believe had their opportunity to kind of make their pitch to Downs, or maybe some sort of mystery team swooping in here. Is that kind of where things stand on the Caleb front in your mind?
I tell you what, Brandon, here's what's funny. We've been doing this a few years now, more than a minute, as the kids would like to say. And this is probably the one thing on the Georgia beat where, like, you started hearing things, I don't know, several days ago, and it's now reached the point in the Come On Downs or Caleb Downs watch where people are just putting themselves out there, making predictions. They're saying, you know, hey, readership, because Brandon, you and I, we know we don't operate in a vacuum. We know there are other sites that do report on the dogs out there, and everybody's like, you know, with very, very full chest and very full flex, they're like, a lot of people really believe that number 2 right there on your screens is going to be a dog, and he's going to help take them to continued heights. And I mean, I think the thing to think about, that's the thing that I think most football guys would think about, is what are you going to do with potentially the top 2 safeties in America, or the 2 first-team All-America safeties, or 2 Thorpe Award finalists in the same backfield on the same back end? I think Kirby Smart might get some sleep next season if both of his safeties are one Starks and Caleb Downs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would ask you is how does that change a defense? It's clearly great to have a player like Downs who could be, literally he could be, you know, the best player in the country, you know, next year, certainly the very best at his position. But if you do have 2 safeties, the likes of Starks and Downs, I mean, how does specifically that change your defense?
I think it's going to give you a chance. Either it's going to tell those running quarterbacks, I might as well get my 3 or 4 yards instead of throwing it downfield and just take off for the chains, or it might give a guy like a a Damon Wilson, instead of having a 7-sack season next year, he might have a 10-sack season next year because they're going to just cover it up. And the other thing is just flying down in the run game. I mean, though I don't know if people really realize that Caleb Downs led Alabama in tackles last year. He had over 100 tackles. First of all, freshmen don't do that at Bama, even Nick Saban's Bama. And he was like the first freshman to lead the team in tackles since they've really been keeping statistics beyond the 70s, going back past the 70s. So you start putting that type of athlete together, and, you got a guy, Malachi is probably the better athlete of the two, which is kind of really kicking tires on a Testarossa here. But then you've got Caleb Downs, who probably would do almost everything Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp and now T-Rob would want him to do on the back end. It would give Georgia a lot of confidence. We know that front seven still won't be NFL first-round pick heavy like the 2021 team or even the 2022 team, but now you start adding in pieces like an Ellis Robinson potentially on the perimeter on the island, and then you've got Julian Humphrey, who probably is poised to have his best season as a Dog. And all of a sudden that secondary, Brandon, you got to start talking about that secondary. When Georgia had lost Javon Bullard, man, he's mocked to go as a second-round pick, and Tyke Smith, who was in some circles one of the 5 highest graded safeties a year ago. All of a sudden, the safety position, you throw in a Jake Pope, you throw in a Dirty Dan Jackson, you throw in a second-year Janelle Aguero, you throw in Ja'Cory Thomas, a guy we continue to hear great things about. And not only might Georgia easily have the best linebacker room in the SEC, they would easily have the best safeties room in the SEC.
I'm going to just ask you this. I'm going to let it hang for a second. Georgia's already, as you said, added Jake Pope. There is a thought here that Caleb Downs could be on his way. We're waiting to find out a final resolution on that. Do you think if Downs were to come, is that the final Alabama transfer to Georgia for this particular cycle?
I would say so. I mean, wait up, Otis. If he jumps in the portal, I think Travion Scott and Glenn Schumann would be there with bated breath waiting on him, because I think the defensive tackle spot, that true kind of nose, is still something Georgia needs to kind of make sure they have a plethora of options for. But I'll tell you what, Brandon, I said this on my show this week on Before the Hedges. I said the transfer portal giveth and the transfer portal taketh away. Let's not be naive here. I think if a talent like Caleb Downs comes to Georgia with 2 seasons of eligibility, some of Georgia's safeties or safeties of the future would probably start thinking about, maybe I need to go play elsewhere. There's a lot of inviting homes these days: Purdue, Florida State, Kentucky, Syracuse, just to name a few. I think a move like Downs would probably also cause some portal transfers, some portal exports from the Bulldog secondary as well.
So on a more serious note for me, I've talked about this week, and I never realized what a statement this is. The aggressive way in which Georgia has gone about recruiting the last week, I think it's unmatched compared to anything we've seen thus far in the Kirby Smart era. And I know how bold that statement is, but the visual of Mason Short decommits from Alabama after having taken the visit to Georgia, and the Kirby copters flying 5 minutes later, which all could have been coincidence. I'm not trying to say it was all perfectly timed, but boy, it sure did look like it was perfectly timed. That Kirby copter going to Mason's high school, right after the decommitment, the photo of Kirby and Jamie French, and obviously a lot of the stuff. It's not just the Alabama connection here with a lot of these recruits, but it's a lot of the guys who were kind of visiting this past weekend. I mean, how much have you seen, Jeff, from Kirby and this staff here this week, specifically with guys like Short, where it just sort of seems like, man, they are as aggressive as possible to make as much hay at the very beginning of this 2025 cycle as they possibly can. And admittedly, a lot of this kind of coming at the expense of Alabama, seeing some decommits here, very much square on Georgia's radar. What have you made about all of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of points to make there. First of all, great job on the melts, great job on the videos. I think they've got Kirby basically doing everything but kissing babies in the parade or something like that all over Columbia County, up and down Bel Air Road. Shout out to anybody that knows what I'm talking about there when I say Bel Air Road. But and it's also kind of funny. You've noticed other fan bases on social media, the thing you don't want to see right now. There's 2 points right now. You don't want to see Kirby Smart at your high school taking a cheesy picture, cheesing with your commitment, because he's done that with a few schools already, and he's done that with almost everyone now. It's kind of weird how this week, Brandon, you were talking about how, Georgia's just very aggressive, and some people are making the points. I think some of our viewers on Before the Hedges made the point, like blood in the water, and Georgia is going to try and put a chokehold on college football all in 1 week. There's only one other week that I think in the Smart time era at Georgia that feels this busy, that feels this fluid. Let's make sure we get our recruiting guy bingo card all checked off here with all of our spots. But Brandon, do you remember that? I think it was the 2018 signing class. I know because I was pulling off the side of the road like 3 times trying to make a 2.5-hour drive home. And it was like Channing Tindall decided to jump in, and then it was another guy, and then they got Cade Mays earlier in the day. Like, it seemed like every hour Georgia was doing something bold and, incredible on the recruiting trail. There were guys that were just like, Georgia, that was the year Georgia had like 7, 8 5-stars in the class. And recruits were like, well, I was going to wait till February, or, well, I didn't know what I was going to do. But then I saw all these guys Georgia was stacking up, and they're like, I just better jump in. This kind of feels like that type of momentum where Georgia's everywhere. You've got Georgia just after a junior day. You've got maybe a Juju Lewis reclassification. You've got a decommitment of Mason Short. You've got the Caleb Downs watch. You've got Kirby everywhere. And that was kind of the prelude to that was, I think, every Georgia staffer tried to get 10 schools, in-state schools apiece on when they all went first day out last week. So it is a blitz of all things. And then Brandon, I kind of combine it with like the 7, 8, 9, 10 guys I've talked to from that weekend already, and how great it was for guys like especially Elijah Griffin, especially Travis Smith Jr., Jaden Perlotti gave me a really insightful look at the weekend. You got a lot of guys telling you that it just feels like it's Georgia right now on top of the mountain, and there's nobody really close to the summit.
I want to ask you more about Elijah Griffin here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, another big story this week has been the fact that Julian Lewis, elite 2026 quarterback, now reclassifying to 2025. He's also taking visits. I believe the first visit he announced post-reclassification was to Georgia, slated to take place next month. What does that mean? What does the reclassification story for Lewis mean for Georgia's chances to kind of get back in on the young man from Carrollton here?
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation that this USC commitment won't stick. That might have to do with Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC. It's also pretty far away from his Southern roots. I just feel like that recruitment, first of all, this is the type of player, Brandon, I think it speaks volumes when Juju reclassifies and he goes immediately in some of the services to the number 1 quarterback in the country for the 2025 class, or the number 3, number 2 overall prospect for 2025. That's how talented he is, Brandon. You've seen it. You've called the games. 96 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, probably unparalleled accuracy. The way he processes the game, the way Joey King puts a lot on his plate, and he just eats it up. And there's a lot of things I really like about Juju, the way he's played at the high level, the way he's got so much on his shoulders, the way it seems like every ball's out maybe a 1/10 of a second or a half second earlier than it should be, or it should be for a really good high school quarterback. Makes great decisions. We can kick the tires on him a little bit and say, will he be a first-round draft pick? Probably not, because I don't think he's going to grow to 6'3", and he may stay in that 6'1" range, 6'2", 185, 195-pound range, where I think a very common parallel is Bryce Young, former Alabama great Bryce Young. Bryce Young, I do realize, went number 1 overall, but, he won't have that prototype number 1 type look to him. I remember Joey King telling me a couple moons ago, he said, I'd put him, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, I'd put him in the same category as Trevor Lawrence right now. And he says, I realize he's not 6'4" like Trevor, but that type of rare high school player, the rare high school difference maker, signal caller, quarterback. And when he said that, and then the numbers started to stack up, it was just obvious. I think he becomes the number 1 target for Georgia at quarterback, even with like Ryan Montgomery coming in on the 22nd, a really very talented, very capable quarterback. in the class of 2025. But Georgia continues to offer. They offered a young man out of Pennsylvania last night, big 6'4" quarterback, another top 200 overall prospect. So Georgia's really looking. And I think, excuse me, I think the thing that must be said here, though, is I do expect the Julian Lewis recruitment to have a significant NIL component, which will always be interesting with Georgia.
Squeeze in one more thing before we let you go here. To me, and I know you've got some stuff coming on this at DawgNation.com, I believe, to me, as significant a development as anything for Georgia the last week seems to be some very forward momentum with Elijah Griffin coming off of his visit this past weekend. Jeff, I think I've told you this before. I just view Griffin to be as important as any recruit that's out there, and I've kind of felt that way for about 6 months at least, in terms of you got to have the elite defensive lineman. This is a guy that's kind of been on the open market, so to speak, and to think first weekend kind of out of the gate in 2025 that Georgia's in that spot with him to impress him on campus and seems to have some forward steps being taken. I think it's a pretty big deal for Georgia. What can you tell us about Georgia and Griffin here right now?
Brandon, you and I have these euphemisms. I know you like to look through comments and quotes, and you like to hear him say family, or you like to hear him say feels like home. Well, Griffin said Georgia felt like home to me, like back in 2022. That's how much he's loved Georgia. Georgia's made him feel like a priority. And I got a new one. Brandon, everybody likes to follow the visits. Well, I like it when you bring your grandma to check out Georgia in January. Because Grandma Edna went and checked out Georgia this past weekend along with Elijah. Such good story there. His grandfather Ulysses, listen to that name, Brendan. Ulysses. He was a wrestler in the Army. He was a college wrestler at Army.
Wow.
And you got this background, and we've got a really good story. It'll be up on DawgNation.com today. That I expect Elijah to say, "Oh my gosh, Kirby Smart said something awesome." And Travion Scott said something that got me vibing. And then I love the facilities, and the guys were great. And then the commitments were all working on me, wanting me to commit. And I would be going against iron sharpens irons. I try to, especially with my experience level here, I try to find more for readers than that. And when you learn that grandmas are coming, and when you learn that he says he loves everything about Georgia, he couldn't name the thing he loves the most about Georgia because there's like 6 things. I think that's significant when you're looking at Elijah Griffin right there. Of course, he's highly rated. He's number 1 in the country across the DL. He's number 3 overall in terms of prospects right now. But Elijah's got this, I'm just going to say it, Brandon. He's got this thing that makes you think, these are the guys that Georgia signs. These are the guys that Georgia wins with. And these are the guys that Georgia puts in the first round of the NFL draft. I'd probably pump the brakes on everybody saying that, he's going to be Jalen Carter this or Jalen Carter that. I don't know if he's that same type of player just because Jalen looked like the Hulk at times in high school, playing tight end, throwing down 180 dunks, showing a lot of savvy and a lot of acumen on the basketball court. Elijah Griffin is mighty good, mighty good, very, very good. But I'm going to leave that 88 squared circle there as a 1 of 1 right now for Georgia. But everybody wants Elijah Griffin. Everybody loves him at Savannah Christian. The story is going to really show him as a humble and a grateful young man. And he even described kind of a miracle in his career that allowed him to get to where he is today. And he takes none of this for granted. And Georgia obviously really wants him. Brandon, I remember stories of him as he was a rising sophomore, as a rising junior, coming to Georgia's camps in June and really just throwing folks away. Kind of like, I'm trying to get a smile from you here, buddy, but it was like one of those Royal Rumbles where the big guy finally gets into the ring and he starts just throwing folks over the top rope. That was kind of what Elijah Griffin was like.
All right, last thing for you, Jeff. Last night, team out and get a chance to play a little darts. We do this every January. We kind of get together as a team because it's hard for us to do that during, Christmas. We see a lot of, folks, we don't always see in person a lot during the year. So we saw our group get together last night, play a little darts. Who were you impressed with on the dart throwing form last night as the entirety of the DawgNation group got together there in the Atlanta area?
Well, I think you got to wonder about who picks these places, Brandon, because there might be some ulterior motives behind this.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd never thrown a dart in my life. People were telling me like, hey, Jeff, you got to get a lower score. You want to get down to 0, and triple rings are good. I gotta say our best dart player was probably our leader, BJ Sweeney. He was a guy that he looked like he was on a par 3 and sticking them all like 6 feet away from the cup.
People have heard us mention BJ before. He is our fearless leader around here. Of course, we always love and respect him, but he comes from like the sort of the darkest corner of like New York, where it's like, snowy like 10 months out of the year. People from that part of the world, they just don't see the sunshine. So anything that's like bowling or darts or curling, the thing when you do, like anything like that, they're going to be good at, because the sun doesn't shine up there. So BJ was, I will admit, a very good dart thrower, far better than me, of course.
It's kind of funny. Number one, we noticed everybody remarked how many members of our team are left-handed. There's actually a lot. I'm in the Southpaw club there, but like, I also thought it was kind of interesting how some of our teammates were like, oh my gosh, I mean, you're just throwing darts, guys. I mean, if you've never thrown darts, it's okay. I mean, you're not going to be great at it. You're not going to be triple 20s right off the bat.
Look at you using
it's
lingo.
Funny.
This guy went from never throwing a dart to now he's using lingo. I love that.
We had members of the team talking and being exuberant in their dart throwing skills last night, and I thought it was funny. I mean, to make your point clear about BJ, if there's ever one, you remember those games, Brandon? I think you and I have played them at bowl weekends or bowl media events where it's kind of like bowling and it's kind of like shuffleboard, where you put all that sawdust. No, it's not sawdust, but you put all that chalk on the
sand. It's sand.
Yeah, it's sand.
I do enjoy the shuffleboard game. I do enjoy that.
I'm sure BJ would be good at that too, because they were like, well, we got to stay inside with no windows and let's just have fun.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Well, speaking of having fun, Jeff, always have fun with you here. Thanks for getting up. Next time we speak, we'll be from a brand new studio. We're kind of excited about that, although we will hear from you next week, though. You were kind enough to do one of our pre-recorded shows, so I certainly appreciate that. Jeff, I know you'll be watching the Caleb Downs stuff closely today, and then whatever else comes after that. Obviously, a lot of irons in the fire for UGA recruiting here right now. So thank you so much, Jeff. Your information is always terrific. Really, really appreciate that. And we'll look forward to seeing you again here on DawgNation Daily. And for those watching on video, a chance to see you in person. Your handsome face showing off on the screen here today. That's an added plus there, too. So we certainly appreciate that.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good week next weekend, man.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I always get tangled up in the cord. It's never a very graceful move when that happens. But the point is, as Jeff said, I am looking forward to having fun next week. So quick programming note as we get ready to slide into a cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So I put my money where my mouth is from the standpoint that I am about to be on that Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. So next week, you've been hearing me say this so much, next week going to be on board Icon of the Seas. So that is going down next week there for me. I'm among the very first. Now, I am not the very first. There are a few people will get a chance to be on there before me, but like I'm among the very first, because I believe like next week is the first week that anybody's actually going to do any sailing on it. I'm not the first. I think I'm like the second, maybe. I think that may be the case. Either way, I'm super excited about it, and I can't wait to come and tell all of you about it there as well. And it's amazing to me how many folks, come up to me and they're always asking, "BA, you're going to be on Icon of the Seas? You're going to do this? You're going to be able to see this?" And I get the chance to say, yes, I am. And I'm thrilled about it. First of all, I want to say thank you to Royal Caribbean for inviting me to be a part of this next week. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am about that, just because I'm into this. I want to see it. I'm dying to see it, just for my own personal desires. And so it was very kind of Royal Caribbean to invite me to be a part of this. Cannot wait for that. And also can't wait to come back and tell all of you about it there as well. And really it keeps the theme going of what we've said before, a wonderful year for Royal Caribbean. The debut of Icon starting next week, the DawgNation Cruise coming up in April, Utopia of the Seas debuts in July. So our great friend Jessica Slater can help you out with all of that. Now, when it comes to the DawgNation Cruise specifically, I want you to go to royaldogs.com, because when you hear me talking about Icon and all that stuff, it ought to be for you a signal that you can plan your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, and there's no better one than the one we're all going to be a part of there in April. We're already hearing from folks all the time. We're like, we're going to be there. We're looking forward to it, and you can be there as well. So we want to see you on board. Allure of the Seas coming up in April for our DawgNation Cruise. RoyalDogs.com for more on that. Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She's going to help you with everything that you need. So quick reminder here as we get ready to go cruising around the SEC. So starting Monday, we're going to have a week's worth of pre-recorded shows. We've worked very hard on these. All the great guests you've come to expect, they're all going to be here. We're also doing something brand new next week for the very first time. We're going to call it Kaylee's Corner with Kaylee Manziel. Normally it's me asking the questions here. Next week, a little bit on the show, we're going to give Kaylee a chance to turn the tables and actually ask me a few questions here and just get a chance to have a little bit more of Kaylee on the broadcast, which I'm excited about, plus some fun topics and just really, really good stuff. All of that on the way for next week. So that is DawgNation Daily. And then those shows were recorded in this studio. And then the week after that, brand new studio. So we got all kinds of fun things going on around here. Now, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean for a moment. So we told you about this yesterday just briefly. Very, very interesting sort of development as it relates to a longtime Ole Miss assistant who Lane Kiffin at one point in time completely disregarded the idea that he might leave. Well, now it seems like he is leaving for Auburn. And we certainly have some evidence that Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin are a little bit salty about this. I think we have this to show you here. Yeah, so here is the announcement that Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin made when Derek Nix left. They say, "We are grateful for Coach Nix and express our gratitude to Derek and his family for their invaluable contributions and dedication to the success we've achieved here at Ole Miss. Acknowledging the opportunity to become a first-time play caller with full-time play calling duties as offensive coordinator at Auburn University, we extend our sincere well wishes to the Nix family this new endeavor. We're going to begin our search for a new wide receivers coach immediately with the objective of finding the best fit to coach the top wide receiver room in America." That was the statement from Lane Kiffin. Now, a couple of reasons why this is interesting. Is this actually jumped the gun on the official announcement from Auburn? So Ole Miss actually sort of let the cat out of the bag on the Nix announcement from Auburn. And also, the notion of, well, he's going to go there, and for the very first time in his career, he gets to be a play caller with play calling duties, essentially saying he was a little more than just a figurehead there at Ole Miss. That's a little bit of a slight, some people thought. And it's also one of those deals of, Auburn just moved off of Philip Montgomery as offensive coordinator. A lot of folks have kind of wondered what Hugh Freeze's role in that offense is going to be, and much the same way that Lane Kiffin was sort of stirring the pot with Pete Golding, and not Pete Golding, he's at Ole Miss now, but Kevin Steele at Alabama, and who was in control of the defense for the Crimson Tide last year. Some of that sort of feels like this. So this is one of those soap operas that kind of got lost in the radar, a little bit lost under the surface a little bit this week just because of everything else that's been going on. But kind of a fun back and forth between Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Lane Kiffin there at Ole Miss, some kind of fun stuff going on with all of that. Now, strange story coming out of Columbus, Ohio, where, as we said a little earlier, I've told you before, I think there are a lot of weird vibes around Ohio State. And admittedly, it's not all been bad. As we said, they brought in Quinshon Judkins. They've kept a couple of players in the program for next year. So it seems like there's some good stuff going on. But one of the things that's a little bit strange is, adding to all of this, is it looks like they are poised to bring in Bill O'Brien as offensive coordinator. And I'm here to tell you, this is not being received well from Ohio State fans. This is the guy most recently Patriots offensive coordinator was at Alabama. Alabama fans weren't happy with him. O'Brien has just seemingly gone from job to job, but not always with the greatest level of success, including times working with coaches like Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, who almost everyone has been successful with. But O'Brien has sort of had a lesser level of success on all of that. And the thought here is that O'Brien is coming to be offensive coordinator, and Ryan Day, who, like, the sort of the best thing about Day is his offensive play calling abilities, but it seems like some of the chatter coming out of Columbus right now is he could be willing to give that up to bring in O'Brien. I have to say, I have no idea what any of this is about. I really don't. The one thing that makes Ohio State, I would think, pretty formidable is Day's ability to kind of coach in game. Now, he kind of turtles up a little bit, in the fourth quarter, as he did in the Peach Bowl against Georgia, so maybe O'Brien's there to sort of prevent that. Excuse me. But beyond that, Day's a pretty good offensive coach. Like, why you want Bill O'Brien does not necessarily make a lot of sense to me, but nonetheless, that's the chatter. Buckeyes fans don't seem too happy on this either. Another point, on another topic, it looks like the federal government of the United States could be looking to get involved with what has been ongoing about the restriction on transfers around college football. You may have seen some of this. Ross Dellinger from now Yahoo Sports had some of that the other day. So basically, it looks like we saw a court rule against the one-time transfer rule a few weeks ago, and that mostly involved basketball players, but we said at the time that's perhaps a little bit of a precursor to what the future is going to be, where the NCAA, without kind of declaring the athletes as employees and engaging in some form of collective bargaining, I'm talking about college sports overall, is going to have a hard time enforcing some sort of transfer rule against the sport or, in their various sports. And look, legally, I guess I get all of this. I mean, to me, it sort of seems like, if you wanted a different outcome, you could just interpret the law differently, because it certainly seems like over the course of the last few decades, these laws, have just been interpreted differently based on whatever public opinion about college athletics was at the time. But I'm not a lawyer. I can't say that for sure. So I get the legal part of this. Everybody seems pretty convinced that the law on this is fairly straightforward. The NCAA and college athletics, in general, just don't have the right to restrict these transfers. But I got to tell you, at any point in time, this is the question I think you have to ask yourself. At any point in time, is someone with some power, someone with some authority, someone from like that sort of the top corridors of power in America, is anyone going to come in and say, hey, we don't necessarily want, college athletics to die a death by 1,000 cuts, blow after blow after blow after blow, to its ability to sort of organize itself around some sort of rules and sort of some sort of protection of the system. And that's not to say that we're completely resistant to all forms of change, whether it be NIL, transfer portal, things like that. I mean, I would say that most of the changes around college athletics, for the most part, have been changes for the better. But this idea that you have no ability to enforce rules in any form or fashion, I don't know how college athletics can remain recognizable if that's the pace with which all of this is going to move. The thing you're going to hear me say a lot, and you've probably heard me say this before, moving forward, they're going to be like two camps. You're in the camp of, I'm okay with some change, but I think that the system is mostly good and needs to be protected. Or I'm in the camp of, I think the system is mostly corrupt and therefore it needs to be torn down. And if that's the camp that you're in, then you need to say that out loud, and people need to decide for themselves of, are we really going to sit here and allow, college football to keep, and college athletics in general, but in this case we're talking about college football, to keep changing so radically that one day we look around and say, I don't even recognize this anymore. Is that really where we're going to go with all this? I don't know, but someone smarter than me probably needs to step up and wonder that here pretty soon. Let me also give you one more thing real quick. So I think it's really interesting. Alabama, from a media standpoint, is clearly trying to circle the wagons here in the early days of the Kalen DeBoer era. You've seen, Chris Lowe, the ESPN reporter, who for the most part really acts as little more than a stenographer for the Alabama football program. He had a story at ESPN.com about, the players who are not transferring, boy, they just believe in what's happening here in Tuscaloosa. And then you've also got Greg McElroy, who admittedly is an Alabama grad. Here's a quote from McElroy about Dan Lanning, who I think most of us sort of thought was the top candidate for this job, the one they should have hired. McElroy says that Lanning was never going to happen. He says, I'm telling you, with some knowledge of how it was going to go down, Lanning wasn't even an option, because not only was there a $20 million buyout, but there's a different contract built into his contract that would have exceeded 2025 to go to $30 million for him to get to the table to negotiate. I'm not even sure what that means. But basically, Greg McElroy is saying that they weren't going to even consider Dan Lanning because the buyout to get him hired was too expensive. This is a program that's had the same coach for a million years. They're not, most programs, a lot of programs are paying a buyout to a coach every 3 or 4 years. Alabama hasn't had to do that, but according to McElroy, just too expensive to go out and get Dan Lanning. I don't believe Greg McElroy on this. I do like McElroy as an analyst. I don't believe him on this. But if he were telling the truth, that Alabama truly didn't consider Dan Lanning because of a buyout and instead chose to hire a coach like DeBoer, who's good and actually beat Lanning on the field a couple of times this year, we'll acknowledge that, and also beat him in 2022 as well. But if you chose DeBoer over Lanning because of Lanning's buyout, then you've probably made one of the dumbest decisions you could ever make, because of the fact that what Lanning has, deep knowledge of the SEC. He's worked at Alabama. He was Georgia's defensive coordinator. He recruits all over the place. He's a better recruiter than Kalen DeBoer. But if you chose DeBoer over Lanning because of Lanning's buyout, then you've truly made, I believe, what's going to end up being proved as one of the most regrettable decisions anyone could make. Now, listen, DeBoer could still be successful, but we're seeing in the early days here, he's having a hard time kind of figuring out the landscape in the SEC. We just play full contact down here. We throw elbows, and DeBoer thus far is showing himself not to be used to that. Lanning would have been more ready for that. So if it is true what Greg McElroy says, that Alabama chose not to go in the direction of Lanning because of the buyout, what a mistake that could end up looking like. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, first of all, best wishes to the Georgia basketball team in Rupp Arena on Saturday against Kentucky. Georgia, can they still be road warriors? They won a couple times already on the road in the SEC. Can they do it again at Rupp? I don't know, but we'll certainly be wishing them well as they try that. We're having a good time with this basketball team here right now. And speaking of good times, let's close out our week here with some golden shoes. And speaking of Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, how about Dina Pruitt? They're enjoying themselves in Barbados right now, where she says the temperature's 82 degrees. I'll take that. Looks like they're on Jewel of the Seas. I'll take that any day over the cold weather we've been having here in Georgia. So, Dina, hope y'all are enjoying that and having a really good time. We appreciate that. Golden shoe going out to you for that. South Georgia Dog sent this to me. The idea that Jim Harbaugh could be going to the NFL. Brian Kelly, possible replacement. It's been rumored. He says, how about a golden shoe from South Georgia Dog for the man and his family? He says if he goes up there to take the Michigan job, he won't have to fake that Cajun accent any longer. Funny stuff from South Georgia Dog. We'll give him a golden shoe for that there, too. And how about this one? There was some talk the other day about a little bit too much facial hair on me, not shaving. And then our buddy UGA Nation 412 says, I'm out here ready to deliver some presents next year. I don't know that I quite have the full-on white full beard, but I was a little unshaven a little earlier this week, as some pointed out. So we will give UGA Nation a golden shoe for that. The white beard not looking too bad, unfortunately matching the ever-growing whiteness of my hair there as well. So funny stuff to UGA Nation. Golden shoe going there. And then our buddy Georgia Bulldoge, who we talked about the other day, speaking of Lane Kiffin, who Kiffin retweeted, and we talked about that on the show, and he says, when you're watching your favorite podcast and they feature your tweet, he says, I appreciate y'all. Well, we appreciate you too, because it was a very, very funny thing from Georgia Bulldoge. So we will give him a golden shoe for that there as well. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Long time since they've beaten Georgia. And the good news is, while I'm gone next week, that number's going to keep on climbing. 1,168 days is where it stands right now. So that is our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you next week for a great week of pre-recorded shows. And then back the following week, and I'll tell you all about my time on Icon of the Seas, and we'll sort of figure out what's next for these dogs there as well. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. By the way, speaking of heating, I could use a little bit right now. I wore the short sleeve shirt today for the first time in a while. I just sort of grabbed it. Some days, to be honest with you, I just sort of grab whatever I can find and come into work. And I am cold in here today. But nonetheless, we're going to roll through here. And I told you today we would do a much longer series of comments. That yesterday were short. We've had all kinds of crazy stuff going on. Next week, obviously, no live commentary, as I enjoy a little bit of sunshine. So from that standpoint, we're going to try to get you as many good comments as we can here today. A little bit of chatter over at DawgNation.com about dart throwing. Yes, we had a nice time last night. A little team company outing. We do this in January, typically speaking. Pretty fun. And, kind of cool. Like, I hadn't really played a lot of darts in my life. I guess I didn't really realize that I'd not really played darts. It's one of those things, well, of course I've played darts. But when you start playing darts, you realize, well, actually, maybe I haven't played that much darts, because I thought that all you're supposed to do was, like, throw it to the middle. But come to find out, there's a lot more going on than just that. So it was also like one of those sort of fancy places where they kind of have some sort of, like, artificial intelligence that keeps the score for you. Pretty fun. Pretty fun. Let's see what else. Roger Hall, I believe, talking about Dan Lanning. Yeah, we were talking about this a little earlier in the regular show, that, all of a sudden now the propaganda coming out of Tuscaloosa is, oh, we never wanted Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning was never a consideration because his buyout was so expensive. I mean, listen, at a certain point in time, you're not wanting to pay Dan Lanning's buyout. You can't afford to keep your players. What's the Paris Hilton thing about stop being poor? Like, at a certain point in time, Bama may need to stop being poor. That may need to be a consideration here at some point in time. If they can't afford the coaches and they can't afford their players, then Paris Hilton may have a little word for them at that point. Brandon Griffin says it's Bama fans trying to save face. They want you to believe that nobody would have turned them down. We all know DeBoer was like their fourth option. Yeah, I mean, look, Kalen DeBoer may be a good coach. Alabama wouldn't hire someone that didn't at least have that potential. But Kalen DeBoer is a total unknown. And now, in addition to hiring another unknown as defensive coordinator and an unknown from like Buffalo as whatever, coach, now they're bringing in some sort of guy from Wisconsin whose name sounds like suspiciously close to Hitler, first of all, but that's kind of weird. But, second of all, it's another guy that's just sort of a total unknown as well to, folks down here. It's like, how you going to do this? Like, how are you going to build this coaching staff that has such little familiarity to the rest of the SEC? I just think that's a really, really tricky thing to try to pull off. Randy Hall says, will I be coming back with tan lines? Well, my goal is to come back with a tan. Now, I will say that looking at the forecast yesterday, it wasn't as 80 and sunny, clear skies as perhaps I wanted it to be, especially in Miami. We were in Miami for the Orange Bowl. It was a little bit overcast. It sounds like it might be a little bit. But one way or another, I will come back tan. I'm going to try my best to anyway. I'm a big fan of the winter tan. I really like that. Because, when you're, sort of big fat face, if you can't tone it, tan it is generally my thought on life when it goes to that. All right, let's see what else here at DawgNation.com. DT says, when BA is quoting the great philosopher Paris Hilton, he's ready for a vacation. In some respects, that's probably true. I'll come back to DawgNation.com here in a minute. Let me pop over to YouTube just for a moment there as well. JC says that Kalen DeBoer is Brian Harson's cousin. By the way, we did talk about this for our First and 15, which we do live. We pre-recorded the regular show, which, as you know, now after next week, we'll be back to live on all that again. But the point is, the Julian Sayin stuff happened after we recorded the show this morning. So we did reference that on the First and 15. So it certainly sounds like Kalen DeBoer had a little bit of a different choice than Julian Sayin. Want to go with Austin Mack, the other quarterback there. So Sayin seems to be on his way out of Alabama because of the fact that that new coach Kalen DeBoer just wasn't quite showing him the love. So I don't know, man. That's a pretty risky move to make, but apparently that's one that DeBoer feels like he's okay in making. Jay Shipe says the BA is undefeated playing darts in College Station with Jimbo Fisher keeping score. That's right, Jay. That's exactly right. Langton Stank says, can you remember a more stacked secondary than Georgia's going to have when Downs transfers? No, I would say that's probably pretty historic, right? I mean, especially at the safety position, but secondary overall. And I mean, I think you have to say that. That's about as historic as you can get. Caleb McCollum says, do you think that the Starks Downs combo could be better than Ed Reed, Sean Taylor? Sean Taylor only played with Reed 1 year his freshman year. It's an interesting comparison. I guess we would probably say that Reed was probably a better player in the NFL than he was in college. Right now, he was a very good player in college, of course, but he's probably a better player in the NFL than he was in college. But that was a great safety tandem. And I'd say you'd have to probably say that was the one that's going to come the closest to maybe being what Starks and what Downs would be if they are indeed together. Good question. That's a really good question. Let's see what else. Tough Stuff says, what's the better flip, George Pickens or KJ Bolden? Well, at the time, I would have said, Pickens just simply on the basis of that was kind of unlocking what we thought Georgia really needed, which was that elite 5-star receiver. As it turns out, history actually played out a little bit differently. Pickens, for various reasons, wasn't always playing as much as some Georgia fans would have liked, and yet the offense, for the most part, thrived during the Pickens era. So a little bit of a change in narrative while Pickens was here. Conversely, you now see KJ Bolden seemingly trying to end a different narrative, which is, Georgia's recruiting success in that part of Gwinnett County, specifically at Beaufort High School. So obviously Bolden kind of representing that little bit of a narrative change. And we haven't heard as much about this, but, Bolden was also a little bit of a rebuke against the idea, well, if so-and-so program like Florida State wants to money whip Georgia for a prospect, they can, because of whatever, reason people were inventing about stuff like that. Georgia also kind of quieted that narrative when it won the KJ Bolden recruitment too. So ultimately, I think the Pickens was probably a bigger deal to me at the time, but it probably stands as a possibility that the Bolden story for the next 2 to 3 years could prove to be bigger. Bo Molinari says, if I get a tan, it might make my beard look even wider. Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, but at the same time, it's just like, I sort of feel like most of us probably look better a little tanner, and so I feel like the tanner I am, the better things are. I also know this, my hair's probably turned gray a little bit too premature. I'm going to be wrinkled premature as well because I spend way too much time out in the sun. Way too much time out in the sun. So one of these days I'll be pretty wrinkled. At that point in time, maybe I will just grow a full beard so you can even tell. Let's see what else. G. Grace says the Greg Byrne, when he went on the Feinbaum show, said he got a lot of interest in the Bama job. Well, there's no doubt there's going to be a lot of interest for it. I mean, there's no doubt that's going to be the case. How much was this of, oh man, Kalen DeBoer was the guy we wanted more than anything else. The, this kind of stuff is always spun. And if Georgia was hiring a coach, they'd be spinning it too. This is not specific to Alabama. Everybody spends this because of the definition of how a job actually gets offered. Coaches aren't visiting campus. This is why we could tell you that the Dan Lanning report of, oh, he's in Tuscaloosa. We knew that was incorrect. Or, if you don't go on campus to interview for these jobs necessarily. So a lot of this stuff is sort of done behind the scenes. They're not touring the facilities. They're deciding they're going to take the job. Then they show up, as the coach who's going to get the job, because all of this requires a certain level of secrecy. And so when Kalen DeBoer says, "Oh, we weren't interested in any other coach other than," when Greg Byrne says that about Kalen DeBoer, well, in a roundabout way, that's probably true because of the way in which all of this stuff sort of takes place, through back channel conversations. That's Bama doing this now, but 20 years from now, if Georgia's looking to replace Kirby Smart, they'll be behaving the same way. That whatever coach they hire is the only coach they offer the job to, because that's just kind of the way this stuff goes. Scott Pete says, I have skin cancers cover up. So obviously you do have to take that seriously. And I do really try to wear sunscreen. I'm pretty good about wearing sunscreen. I am, but I do like being outside, admittedly. Paul Moon on the subject of George Pickens now in Pittsburgh. They've obviously had their quarterback issues, which he points out. He says the dude, though, has been a beast so far in the NFL, outside of perimeter blocking, which I guess was a thing the other day. So, yeah, I mean, listen, George is a very interesting personality, right? We all saw that while he was here at Georgia, and not always the easiest to manage, just being completely honest. But obviously you take the talent with the challenge sometimes. Foster Moss says, BA, have fun and safe on that 456th cruise, which is very funny indeed. Very funny. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style looking ahead to the future of Fran Brown at Syracuse, saying, what if Fran Brown has Syracuse at number 4 if they win the ACC? Listen, the highest ranked conference champions will be in the playoff, and the top 4 ranked conference champions will earn that first round bye into the quarterfinal of the college football playoff. Listen, Fran Brown's chances for success are perhaps pretty good. I mean, maybe not so much this year, but eventually maybe so. Who knows? Crow King 123 says, I wonder what kind of recruits DeBoer's going to get. That's the massive question for him. It is. Now, the one thing about DeBoer is when you start looking ahead to like a class of 2025, a little bit different than these coaches that are hired during kind of the normal coaching cycle, which is in December. Because of the early signing period, we've seen new coaches hurt pretty badly by their first signing class because it happened so quickly. It's almost like a year zero type thing where you just sort of skip over that, move to the next one. So in a roundabout way, if DeBoer can ever get to the point where he's really looking at 2025s, he would have a chance to recover a little bit. And, the spring portal window will still provide Alabama an opportunity because, like, the one thing Alabama can sell, like right now they're suffering, and I'm trying to be as objective as I can be right now. Right now they're suffering from it's no longer Nick Saban, and that seems like a huge downgrade in the eyes of a lot of players. But in the springtime, they've had a little bit of a chance. Players have to process that, and now it's Alabama saying, we are in need of players. Who wants to come to Alabama and play? And that could be a little bit more of a selling point. They could do a little bit better in the spring portal, but it won't be with SEC players because those players won't be eligible to play in the league based on the current rule. And then if DeBoer can ever get to the point where he's like really doing some legitimate 2025 recruiting, he could have a little bit more of an on-ramp to have success there. But the problem he's running into right now is, and maybe these things are going on, I just haven't seen it, but you're not really seeing a lot of those photos of DeBoer out visiting recruits the same way that you do Kirby Smart. Now, DeBoer may be doing it. I just haven't seen them. But what the perception I have is that he's forced to stay in Tuscaloosa right now, still trying to hire staff. still trying to, allegedly poach some recruiting staffers and, and mainly more important than anything else, trying to keep the rest of this Alabama roster together. So he's at home, kind of trying to circle the wagons here and play defense against losing players he already has. And that's giving coaches like Kirby Smart a chance to be on the road and go out and working ahead. And I've said this before. One of Kirby Smart's biggest advantages over his competition is a simple thing. You're working on the now. Kirby's laying, a foundation for the future. And that is how Kirby always gets you. Everybody else is sort of panicked of, we need players right now for this team here, right here. And Kirby's sort of working on that depth for a year or two ahead. And that built-in advantage of having taken care of your current business and being able to look ahead to your future business, that's one of those things that Kirby Smart just seems to always have as an advantage over some of his competition, in much the same way that Nick Saban perhaps at one point in time would have had that too. All right, let's get some Facebook comments here for a moment. Hope everybody's doing well. Let's see what else is going on. Jamie Huff says, when exactly did our coaches meet with the Downs family? So I guess, obviously all this is just sort of based on the online chatter that you're seeing, but I guess it would have been, 2 nights ago? Is that right? Is that what's being said? Um, Joel Moody says BA will go super long on the comments today. If that means he'll get the commitment news live on the show, bank on it. Comments till 1 p.m. if necessary. To a certain extent, that's true. Although I will let you in a little bit of a little sort of inside business baseball that you don't really care about. That if the news were to break right now at the end of our show, it'd be fun because we all get a chance to talk about it. That'd be fun for us to do together, but it'd actually be better to kind of come back and do a separate video because you just get all kinds of extra clicks, which y'all don't care about, but is something we probably do think about around here. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin kind of pointing out that the initial projection was that sort of 48, 72 hour range, and now we are to that point. By the way, Miriam, how am I looking today? Clean shaven for you on that 55-inch TV. Barry Watkins says, I'm going to end the show. The Caleb announcement will come. Maybe that's the case. So I am still around for all of today, Saturday. So I'm not leaving until Monday. And the truth is that I might even be available, some next week when I'm, this is a little bit of a different type of thing. If I'm, a true vacation with my true family, a lot of times I don't like to sort of step away from that. But if something like this were to happen while I'm gone, I might, if I can find the internet signal, I might, pop on and be a part of that. But this weekend, I will be around a pretty good bit. So if something were to happen later on, I'm still going to be around for the most part. Miriam Corbin, thanks for the kind words. Ryan Walker, who's always good with the comparison, says the last secondary that was loaded like the Dog's going to have would have been the 1978 USC Trojans with Ronnie Lott, Dennis Smith, and Joey Browner. He says, FYI, Marcus Allen originally was a safety. I did not know that. That's interesting. John Robinson converted him to running back. Allen was the number one player in the nation coming out of Lincoln High School that produced 2 more dogs, Terrell Davis and Roderick Robinson. See, Ryan Walker, man, he's got his knowledge, man. He's great. Great stuff. Joseph Kennedy also waiting on Caleb Downs like much of the rest of us are. Craig Jones says we base our happiness on a teenager going to our favorite university, LOL. Well, I would dispute that just slightly, and I understand the point that you're making, Craig, and it's sometimes funny too. We obviously make a big deal about a lot of this kind of stuff, but I base my happiness on a lot of things. Thankfully, there are a lot of things in life that make me happy, and Georgia getting good news from a player I'd love to see them have just makes me even happier. So this is the thing I try to keep in mind, is that college football is really fun because it keeps us entertained and it makes us feel connected to people. We develop better friendships and we have greater, deeper experiences. And so, college football works really well in all those regards. But thankfully, we also can say that, hey, the things that really, truly matter most are, our work and our family and our kids and our wife and our whatever, that thankfully the experiences we have around college football just make me even happier, but I get the point that you're making. Joseph Kennedy says Bama fans are holding up the sign that says help wanted. Yep, indeed, that's the case. Marshall Fleming says, I need to get a pair of DawgNation board shorts made for the cruise. I'd buy a pair. Marshall, that's actually a really good idea. Craig Jones says, going on cruises make me happy too. Got to wait until April. Craig, The countdown I always find is really fun, and April can sometimes seem like a long time to wait, of course. But the countdown for the cruise I always really enjoy. It's the looking on the photos and the videos that are out there and kind of planning this and planning that and looking at the ports you're going to go to. I mean, to me, that's the free part. And my wife and I talk about this sometimes. Uh, like it's just she and I going together on this one, and then our whole family's going to to a little bit of a getaway in February. And it's like it's the time that you spend sort of thinking about that and planning about that and talking about that. It's the anticipation, the buildup. I told y'all before, I'm essentially a kid at heart, and this is one of the ways I sort of function a little bit like a kid. Is I just love looking forward to this. And while you sometimes want stuff like this to sort of hurry up and be here, it's that time of it's like if you told me today we're doing something like a trip on Royal Caribbean tomorrow, I'd be thrilled, but I would miss out on that kind of time to sort of anticipate and get ready for it, which I do really enjoy, if that makes sense. Um, Lucy Bowers Boykin says, "Spring, summer, and sunshine make me happy. Winter makes me as sad as Gump fans are today." First of all, Lucy, that's very funny, and I also completely agree. I am not built for this sort of cold, dreary weather we've been having. I definitely have sort of tropical blood in me, I believe, because I do indeed enjoy the sunshine. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says a cruise is the best vacation in my opinion. And Jennifer, I'm glad to hear you enjoy them too. That's awesome to hear. Uh, let's see what else. Let me pop back around to the other comment sections here for a moment. Randy Glass says, looks like Texas is going to be our main let me get the rest of this. Where tell you what, let me just we got a lot more comments here on DawgNation.com. Let me scroll back up to where Randy was. Scott Harris says, I think that Saban lost the connection he had with his players if he ever had it and led him to leaving. I definitely think that, I mean, like anybody would, trying to make peace with a new era and make peace with a new set of rules, which for the most part, Alabama's still doing okay with. But trying to make peace with all of that is not an easy thing to do. And perhaps that could have hastened some of Saban's retirement a little bit. I think that's a possibility. Rome Dog says winter equals basketball season. I don't, I do like basketball and I enjoy that. I just enjoy outside sunny weather probably a little bit more. Ken Holcomb says, believe me, BA, the melanoma I'm dealing with plus basal cell carcinoma is not worth a tan at all. Just be who you are, sir. Ken, I understand that. And we obviously continue to pray for you for sure. Randy Hall says, did you hear that Alabama's trying to get David Cooper from UGA? I saw some online chatter about that. I mean, obviously, if you're Kalen DeBoer, you've got to get SEC contacts somewhere. You've got to get them from somewhere. And so that's going to probably come from somebody else's staff. And of course, in the case of Georgia, they've got the best. So it's not a surprise to me necessarily that someone like DeBoer would want to kind of essentially copy off Georgia's paper and bring guys like that in. He desperately needs them. Let's see what else. Randy Glass says maybe Saban wanted the ego boost as the world watches Bama fall without him. I mean, listen, if Saban felt that way, he would not be the first one to feel that way. You walk away and you sort of hope you really noticed and really missed, and maybe that's what he's getting here right now. DT says Josh Brooks is way brighter than the Alabama AD, Greg Byrne. He says, I saw that guy on Feinbaum, and he was not impressive at all. Yeah, I mean, he was obviously trying to sort of, spin some of the stuff related to NIL and some of the, stuff about the player transfers and the rule systems they're dealing with right now. Kind of a tough sell for Greg Byrne on that. Randy Hall says that Coppertone can be a new sponsor for DawgNation. Yeah, I like that. Scott Harris says someone in X said it will happen to UGA when Kirby leaves. I told him that Georgia doesn't hire a mercenary as coach. Kirby cares about his alma mater, which is certainly true. I mean, obviously, eventually, sometime in the future, even if it's 20 years from now, Georgia will be in the situation of having to find a next coach, and it won't be easy for UGA either. That's true. I mean, there's a part of what Alabama is dealing with that was kind of always going to be true, and just kind of the cost of doing business. When you've had the same coach for as long as Alabama has, and he's been as successful as he's been, obviously the next transition not going to be easy there on that. Brandon Griffin says the way Saban handled this, I don't think he wanted the next guy to have immediate success. Might give the impression that he's that he wasn't the primary reason for Alabama's greatness. Maybe you're right about that. I think it's a little bit more likely to be this. I think they tried to time the retirement announcement at a way that prevented a lot of this kind of stuff, and it actually just blew up in their face, because I think they thought by, waiting as late as they did, even though there was a 30-day transfer window, that it would just be too hard, logistically speaking, for players to kind of find a new home within the SEC. And it's just sort of turning out not to be true. So I believe that they tried to play this as cleanly as they could, because they could have announced this pre-signing day. They could have announced this in early December. But if they would have done that, then players in the 2024 class would have known Saban was going to be there. And obviously, a lot of them would have chosen not to come. They could have announced this at any point in time to prevent this from occurring, but there were other things at the time I believe they were trying to prevent. And so this was their planned attempt to keep some of that kind of stuff from happening, and the plan has just sort of backfired on them. Randy Glass says we need to turn all this momentum into another natty in 2024. Go for one more in 2024. I like that, Randy. That's really good. I like that a lot. Caleb Downs, by the way, or a reasonable facsimile thereof, checking in on the DawgNation homepage to say, I've noticed that the YouTube dogs are way feistier than the Facebook dogs. And typically speaking, that is true. And speaking of our YouTube folks, let's check in back over there again, and we'll do a few more comments here today. Jim K says Dooley was no Kirby, not even close. And listen, the level of success that Kirby Smart is having, I think even in a short tenure, I think it makes him probably the greatest coach in Georgia football history. I think he's done enough to probably have achieved that. But I do believe, though, the longevity marks that Dooley hit during his career, when you look at 6 SEC championships, that's a lot. When you look at 201 career wins, that's a lot. I think that what you're seeing is that when you start comparing the 6 wins to, like, say, Steve Spurrier, I believe also has 6 SEC championships. Well, the 201 wins, which I believe is the same as Nick Saban, maybe. When you start looking at these other numbers, you realize, Dooley's all-time wins number kind of compares to this, or Dooley's collection of SEC championships sort of compares to this. Dooley did win a national championship, of course. That the actual legacy of Coach Dooley is enhanced by some of the modern comparisons that are going on. Kirby, I think, probably ranks as the best Georgia coach of all time, but the legacy of Vince Dooley, I believe, has been enhanced in recent years when you see just how hard it is to kind of eclipse the numbers he's put together. Jonathan Aaron says, my family and I went to the mountains this past weekend. I had to stop in and show them the bookstore, the field, and a few more spots in Athens. It was the first time. Jonathan, that's really cool. I'm glad you got a chance to share that with your family. And, to anybody who ever goes into Athens, you go there where Sanford State. First of all, the UGA bookstore is a great place to do some shopping. That's kind of a cool thing. But right there at Sanford Stadium, the West End Zone, right there at the bridge, you can kind of walk into that. It's open for the public. You can sort of walk into that area and have a nice look around from the field. Now, if you go too far, there's all kinds of security and things like that. They'll kind of buzz you, and you won't be able to get past that. But you can definitely kind of walk into that area and essentially kind of be in the stadium and have your chance to look around. It's a beautiful view. It's a great chance to experience that. So if you're ever looking for kind of a free way to enjoy kind of a cool part of Athens on a non-game day, that's a great way to do that. So it sounds like Jonathan and his family had a good time doing that. I would advise all of you, it's a great chance to do that. Good to see Breda Pest Management in the comments section here today, having a good time. Thomas Orzak says, do the Dogs have any weak spots? Hard schedule can afford a loss. Yes, so obviously I think you're right that the schedule is tough enough that almost no one is likely to go undefeated this year, I don't believe. And we may never see, at least in the foreseeable future, an undefeated national champion again, at least with the schedules being the way they are right now in the SEC and the Big Ten, the two leagues most likely to produce national champions. The areas in which I think that Georgia probably has a little bit of work to do, I think some of that's along the defensive line. It's great to get Nazir Stackhouse back. It's great to get Warren Brinson back. There is still that need to create. We're going to talk about this in one of our shows next week. There's still that need to create that sort of game wrecker style player that Kirby Smart, to his credit, rightly pointed out Georgia did not have prior to this season. Getting that back, feeling like it did in sort of 2021 or 2022, is one of the jobs of Georgia for this upcoming year. That's an area. And offensively, you know, Brock Bowers' absence leaves a void, and it's a statistical void, and there are numbers that must be matched and replaced. And so I would say you could do some of that with, more productivity from running backs or more productivity from wide receivers, obviously an expanded role from Oscar Dell. But offensively, Georgia being as potent as it's been is in some respects going to require, getting guys to kind of raise their level because you're looking at, 800 yards. As a freshman in 2021, Bowers had 13 touchdowns. You're looking at big numbers that've got to be replaced. And so those, to me, are the two big things. How do you replace the offensive production that someone like Bowers was providing? That's not just one guy that does that. It's probably a collection of guys. And how do you get this defensive line back to being one of the true strengths of the team and, kind of right there at the nation's best? Crow King 123 says, are you excited for the basketball dogs this weekend at Kentucky? Crow King, you better believe that we are. You better believe that we are. Let's see what else. Andrew Hughes says, can we expect the same output or greater from Etienne in respect to his predecessors? It's a good question. Etienne was, ninth in the SEC in rushing last year. The one good thing about him here at Georgia is he's playing behind a much better offensive line. I still think there's going to be a running back room that tries to get a lot of different guys involved. Etienne sort of shared carries at Florida. My guess is he sort of shares carries here at UGA a little bit. Now, who is he mostly sharing with? Is it, a Branson Robinson back from injury? Is it a Nate Frazier, perhaps as exciting of a freshman running back as Georgia's had in quite some time? Jeff Sentell and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation about that next week. That's, I think, going to be kind of a cool discussion. So I would say that Etienne is probably in a situation where he will be carrying and sharing carries somewhat. Exactly how much, I think that's still yet to be determined. Breda Best Manager says he has a BA and BS. I sort of feel like the same thing there, Breda. I feel like that's what my degree is in as well. Thomas also pointing out Dylan Bell. Yeah, I mean, of all the guys who I would say easiest and maybe the most fun to sort of bet the over on for the upcoming year, Dylan Bell may truly be one of those guys. I think you may be right about that. May truly be one of those guys. Let's see what else. Nature Gator says buying a house on the coast of Florida right now is not necessarily a good long-term investment. It's a good investment for retirement for millionaire retired football coaches. Well, certainly Nick Saban's got that big plot of land down there in Jupiter, Florida, big old home down there for sure. Thomas also mentioning Julian saying it. We talked about this a little earlier, and then we also talked about that during our 1st and 15 a little earlier there too. This news breaking after we had pre-recorded this morning's normal show. It certainly appears that this is an example of Kalen DeBoer just sort of casting his lot with a different quarterback with Austin Mack instead of Sayan. And it seems like Sayan's going to be very quickly scarfed up. You're hearing about Ohio State here. I think you've heard some USC out there. It seems like it seems like Ohio State may be the current leader. This is a big time prospect. And so, DeBoer's got a right to sort of go with the quarterback he wants to go with. But at a time in which there seems like a lot of instability at Alabama, this seems to be sort of another piece of that was kind of unforced and sort of chosen by DeBoer. A very interesting thing indeed. All right, one or two more comments, and we're going to get ready to get out of here after that. Paul Moon, on the subject of the running back, says I'd have to guess more of Roderick Robinson and Taylor, given that Branson hasn't been able to see the field as of yet. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're hopeful to see Branson Robinson coming back and performing, but a year removed from injury, sometimes that's not always the best version of that guy, whether you might get a couple of years from now. Breda says that people buy those homes in Florida because they can't touch the house if you file Chapter 7. That's really interesting, Breda. That's very interesting. Paul Moon says we got to go to noon today. Well, I don't know that I'm going to be able to pull that off, but I do enjoy your comments here nonetheless. Back on Facebook for a moment. A couple of comments here on Facebook. Let's see what folks are saying over here. Joseph Kennedy taking some jabs at Bama fans. Miriam Corbin, thanks for the kind words, saying I hope we have a wonderful time on our cruise. You're very nice to say that, Miriam. I appreciate that. Very, very kind. Yeah, we are looking forward to getting away for a little while there, for sure. We are. And so thankful that our friends at Royal Caribbean have invited us to be a part of it. Very, very excited. Because we certainly are getting more than we deserve when it comes to all that. Doug Rayburn, thank you for the kind words there, too. I appreciate that. I certainly appreciate that. So Lucy Bowers-Boykin's getting ready to hop off. Lucy, we are there as well. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a moment. Baruch Dog says, as much as I love UGA hoops, there is little chance we win at Rupp. I'd love to be wrong, but I'm not expecting much. This Kentucky team, like a lot of these Kentucky teams as of late, a little bit difficult to figure out, though. Remember, you know, these are, guys that oftentimes a lot of young players, of course, Kentucky sometimes has, and, they're not always playing, quite up to their potential. Although I guess John Calipari did get his 400th win the other night. So good team, obviously a championship contender, never an easy place to win. Georgia does not have a long history of winning games at Rupp Arena, of course, as you know. But still fun nonetheless to watch. The big one for me was Georgia bouncing back after having lost a game to Tennessee. Good team. They could have won it. They didn't, but they did bounce back and really fought hard to win at South Carolina. I thought that was a very big deal. A couple of other things here. Anything else before we get ready to go? Scott Harris says, I think that Bama's finally realizing they were only the beneficiaries of where Saban decided to work. T-Town is nothing special and full of trust fund fans. Yeah, I saw Josh Pate had that line the other day about the trust fund fans. That's a pretty good line. I will say that's a pretty good line. And as far as, the notion of, well, what is Alabama without Nick Saban? I do think we're seeing some evidence of that. And we're going to talk more about this some next week, that this is a program that had a great coach. How great of a program is it without Nick Saban? We are about to find out. Now, Alabama will have bright and sunny days ahead. These very aggressive SEC teams have a tendency sometimes to work until they do find some success. Alabama may not be any different in that regard, but they are finding it to be difficult right now, and Georgia fans are enjoying all of that. So it's about 11:30. Keep a good thought here. We may eventually hear some good news on Caleb Downs. We're watching it very closely. We'll kind of stick with that through the weekend if need be. And then on Monday, we've got a pre-recorded show for you. We'll have a great week of shows coming up. I'll be back live again the Monday after that from some brand new studio digs. We're looking forward to showing off all of that to you. That's going to be a really good time. And I hope you all have a great weekend there as well. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, but also our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. Y'all make sure you find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. It's going to be cold this weekend for sure. So another signal to you. You need to get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. Y'all have a great weekend and a great day. We'll talk to you perhaps soon if the Downs news drops. If not, I'll see you Monday in a pre-recorded fashion and then back here live after that. For DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, we'll look forward to talking to you then.